What is up, everybody? Welcome to another World Cup preview here on Touchline Talk. Before I jump in, I want to take a moment to say be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of these World Cup previews as we get closer and closer to the action kicking off in Qatar, as well as the other content I put out every single week. You can also find my written work on Substack, touchlinetalk.substack.com, as well as on Medium. Okay, continuing in Group G, our second team, Cameroon. This is Cameroon's 8th World Cup appearance, also participated in 1982, 1990, 1994, 1998, 2002, 2010, and 2014. So missed 2018, but had made a couple in a row before that and back in 2022. Best finish for Cameroon, they got all the way to the quarterfinals in 1990. To get to Qatar, Cameroon entered in the second round of Confederation of African Football qualifying. They were in a group with the Ivory Coast, Mozambique, and Malawi. Got through that, topping that group, which set up one of those two-leg playoffs that CAF was using against Algeria. Perhaps the most dramatic entry into the World Cup. Algeria, Cameroon both win 1-0 away from home over these two legs. The second leg was in Algeria, so you go to extra time because the aggregate score is tied, the away goals are tied. Algeria score in extra time, but Cameroon then score an equalizer in extra time. It is their second away goal, so they advance on away goals to book their spot in Qatar. It does not get you can't get much more dramatic than that. That's what I was going for there. In terms of players, an interesting group to highlight here, starting with Andre Frank Zambo Anguissa. Andre Frank Zambo Anguissa had 11 starts between this winter, January into February 2022 Africa Cup of Nations and World Cup qualifying. He has played in 4 of Europe's 5 major leagues. The only one he's missing at this point is the Bundesliga. Of course, he is right now with Napoli in Serie A. He kind of bounced around a little bit. He was at Fulham, wasn't exactly lighting the world up, kind of struggling to find a home and really establish himself. He ends up at Napoli, and this season, for whatever reason, it has clicked for Andre Frank Zambo Anguissa. He is playing exceptionally well. Easily the best he's ever looked in his career. He is dominating the midfield for a Napoli team that is playing out of their minds. They are on the verge of cruising to a Serie A title. It's too early to get there yet, but they have built themselves a great cushion. They are through to the Champions League round of 16, did so in impressive fashion. They are looking like they're one of the best teams in Europe, have been as good as any club team on the planet so far this season. And Andre Frank Zambo Anguissa has been a big reason why. And so I highlighted part of his importance to this Cameroon team. But one of the stories with this team is I'm going to touch on this later more, but some of the guys who are playing really, really well right now, and Anguissa is absolutely one of those players. The other one is the second guy I want to highlight, and that is Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting. Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting was this team's joint top scorer during qualifying with 3. He had 2 seasons where he scored double-digit goals in the Bundesliga for Mainz. That was where he spent most of the early years of his career, were in the Bundesliga. Then, couple stops. If you remember, he ends up at PSG, where he is the guy that comes off the bench sometimes and fills in an emergency, but never gets consistent playing time. He's just a roster depth piece. It was kind of a strange move. And it went basically as you would expect. He scored a few goals, looked fine when he was out there, but just didn't get the opportunities because he was never supposed to get the opportunities. He then goes from PSG to Bayern Munich, returning to Germany in the Bundesliga. By and large, It's gone exactly like it did at PSG. He's picking up these trophies, scoring a goal here or there, playing in cup competitions, games that, the final Champions League group stage game when it's already been clinched, things like that. Maybe he finds an important substitute appearance or two every once in a while. And then this season happens. Bayern Munich looking for a striker after Robert Lewandowski leaves. Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting was not the first choice. He did not begin the season as a regular in the starting 11. He just kind of ended up there in the past couple months and then just scored every single time he played, whether it was off the bench or starting. And then all of a sudden, he became undroppable because he was scoring every single game. Champions League, Bundesliga, DFB Pokal, didn't matter. He was scoring against everybody. And so all of a sudden, he has, equaled his production from previous Bayern seasons. We're in November, and he's having the best stretch of his career. So a very interesting trajectory here where he went from a productive player for lower, lesser teams in those major 5 leagues to playing for PSG as a small piece, taking what was supposed to be that same role at Bayern, except for all of a sudden he's on the field all the time and he's scoring goals all the time, and so Julian Nagelsmann can't take him off. The other thing I want to mention here before I move off of Choupo-Moting. In another world, the player I'm talking about here is Vincent Aboubakar, who scored plenty of goals during qualifying, who scored plenty of goals at AFCON, who has scored plenty of goals in his career for this Cameroon men's national team. One of the more accomplished players in Cameroon history when you look at the goal scoring charts. Without context, he is the striker I would have in here as the player to watch. But the conversation changes when you have somebody in the kind of form that Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting is. And so I went with him because a guy scoring that many goals that quickly for Bayern Munich is automatically a player to watch in this tournament. And so I did want to acknowledge Aboubakar and his importance to this team. It'll be interesting to see how these two guys sort of divvy up the responsibilities in Qatar and what ends up happening at that striker position. But you got two really solid options with what Aboubakar gives you and what Choupo-Moting is producing every time he steps onto the field right now. The third guy, Carl Toko Ekambi, 8 goals between qualifying and AFCON, 5 at AFCON, 3 during qualifying, so he was right there with Choupo-Moting. Last season, really impressive in the Europa League, 6 goals, 2 assists for Lyon. Has consistently been a guy who's given you 10-plus goals a season in Ligue 1. He was also, the other reason I wanted to bring him in here is he is the player that scored the goal in extra time to send Cameroon to the World Cup, so he's always going to have that, and that's going to be part of this team story as well. So when you think, through the middle, you've got these strikers. Toko Ekambi gives you something a little bit different on the wing, a little bit more of that creativity, but ultimately he's another guy who has proven both at the club level and the international level he can score goals and he can do so at a high rate. So that is our third guy, Carl Toko Ekambi. In terms of a breakout star, I went with Martin Hongla. Martin Hongla played the most minutes of any player on this team who is actually in the World Cup squad. That in and of itself tells you how important he is to this team. And from a breakout standpoint, he is in his second season with Hellas Verona in Serie A. And already he is closing in on the totals from a playing time and starts and appearances standpoint that he got to last season. He's playing a much bigger role. The team is struggling. But he is having a very good individual season in terms of getting on the field consistently. That was not something he was really able to do in his first season with the club. And so this is this great opportunity where he's kind of having his breakout, at least to a certain extent, on the club level. And so can he take this consistency he's found in Serie A and then translate it to the World Cup and then bring a good World Cup back and continue, sort of build off that even further? And again, this is a team that, as I've mentioned before with some other ones, you don't have a lot of options here just based on the squad and the age, because that is part of this breakout star category for me. Is I want somebody under the age of 25 who's kind of ready to make that next step in their career. And so Martin Honga is the choice here for Cameroon. In terms of the bottom line for this team, the reason for optimism, I've mentioned it a couple times, but I'm going to get back to it right here. Form. Form of the key players. Andre Fig-Sambo-Anguissa, Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting are playing the best soccer of their careers. They are in the form of their lives. And for a team lacking in top-end talent, when you're comparing Cameroon to some of the other teams, even in Africa, when you're talking about, which African team can maybe make a run in this tournament, the stars, there aren't the big names, the big stars on this team. But Choupo-Moting and Anguissa are playing like stars right now. I mentioned Anguissa has been a central component to Napoli, who are arguably, I'm not willing to actually declare it, but arguably the best team in the world. He's been sensational. He was sensational against Liverpool. You can go down the list. And Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting is scoring left and right. He has forced himself into Bayern Munich's starting lineup, somewhere he was never supposed to be. So these two guys playing this well, having this much confidence heading into the tournament, elevates this team's ceiling at least a little bit. Because now they're just not guys at big clubs. They are guys playing incredibly well at big clubs. And so it changes the conversation about, star power, top-end talent, difference makers, because these two guys are proving right now they do have the ability to be difference makers for some of the best teams in the world. And that has to be acknowledged and that has to be recognized, because that wasn't something that this Cameroon team was necessarily supposed to have. And all of a sudden, they have two guys who are proving that they are capable of doing that, at least right now for this stretch of time. And from Cameroon's perspective, that's all that matters, because the World Cup is now. And they couldn't have timed this better in terms of these players really coming on and key guys for this team really coming into this tournament with all kinds of confidence. In terms of a question, a big concern for me, it is there enough creativity? If you going to look at Football Reference, if you're breaking down the qualifying statistics, according to FBref only, and I say that because some of these statistics got a little confusing, so I wanted to qualify where I was getting them from. But half of the goals in qualifying Cameroon scored were assisted. That's not a high percentage. Additionally, it is not what their key players do best. Anguissa is more of a tempo setter, a destroyer, a guy who's going to dominate a game from midfield, but he's not Toni Kroos or Joshua Kimmich, where these the incredible passing is part of his abilities from a deeper lying position or from a number 8 position. He has picked up his goal involvements this season. That's been part of his development as he's really come on for Napoli. But he's not a guy you're looking to initiate offense through. And then if you go up top, Choupo-Moting, Abubakar, Akambi are all guys who are goal scorers first and foremost. They are poachers more than they are creators. And so this is just a team that doesn't have that guy who is going to sort of unlock a defense, pick that key pass, that really difficult pass that opens up an opportunity. That is my concern. It's terrific that you've got guys scoring goals, particularly Choupo-Moting. Choupo-Moting's life is a lot more difficult And you can see this with Harry Kane sometimes, for example, at Spurs or with England. If you isolate that striker, especially one who, Choupo-Moting does not have Harry Kane's ability to drop deep and distribute the ball. That's not part of his skill set. If you have guys who are goal scorers and sort of goal scorers of the purest form, you got to be able to get them the ball. You got to be able to put them in good positions. And one of my concerns is whether Cameroon are going to be able to do that often enough with this squad. The final thing I will say here is it was unlikely they were going to get out of this group as soon as it was drawn. They are, if you look at the the FIFA World Rankings, if you just look at the talent on paper, they are not the strongest of the African teams. And you draw into a group that is going to present some real challenges. It's not like they caught this tremendous break where you feel like there's definitely a spot up for grabs here. There are some really solid teams in this group. So it was always going to be unlikely that they get out. That was going to be a surprise if that happened. It still would be a surprise for me if they find a way to get out. But they certainly have a better chance looking at things now than 2 months ago, before, when Napoli were just kind of starting to get going and before Choupo-Moting was a factor for Bayern Munich. Sometimes you just catch a break and you get to ride the hot hand or a couple hot hands through a tournament, to kind of steal a basketball phrase. And it does change the conversation for me about what this team can do. I'm now open to the possibility that Anguissa and Choupo-Moting are the best players on the field and Akambi chips in and they find a way to win a game they probably shouldn't, and you get one moment of brilliance and another one, and all of a sudden they find a way to get out of this group. I am open to that possibility in a way I wasn't 2-3 months ago, before this kind of stuff was happening. So, still unlikely for all of the reasons I've laid out, but it's going to be interesting to watch, if nothing else, just to see if these guys can continue their incredible club form going into the national team when, it's not like they've had a month long or 3 weeks of camp building up into this thing. They are playing for their clubs right up until they get a couple training sessions that week before, and now you're playing games, generally speaking. So that shortened sort of takeoff time for this World Cup makes form even that much more important. And this Cameroon team, especially in those important, those key players, are in terrific form right now. So it certainly gives them a better chance and makes it more in the realm of possibility that they find a way to pull this off. It's still going to be a big task for them to get out of the group, though. We shall see what happens. That is the preview for Cameroon. Thank you so much for tuning in. Like I mentioned at the beginning, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time.